This is one of the Senate races that's going to determine basically America's future. I mean, I'm not overselling it. That's what it is. Joining us right now via Skype is the Republican candidate for Senate there in Ohio, J.D. Vance. And it's good to have you. Everybody knows you. They know your book, Hillbilly Elegy, and the film as well, the subsequent film. That was a great answer that you gave, and I don't think that I've never heard it answered that way, or have I mean, it was truthful. I mean, it was accurate. The press didn't really know how to respond. Talk to me a little bit though, because I'm in Texas. This is a border state. But now, because of the policies that people like your opponents support, Ohio's a border state too.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dana. Thanks for having me. It is a border state, especially when it comes to fentanyl, and of course, especially when it comes to illegal aliens who come into our state and commit crime. And the thing that I'd say to my fellow Republicans on this issue, Dana, is we shouldn't let ourselves get put on the defensive, because if you look at these incredibly unusual circumstances that Democrats often point to, there are very often behind those circumstances stories Democrats don't want to tell you, stories the media don't want to tell you. And I just refuse to be put on the defensive about being pro-life. I think that their views are much more extreme. Again, if Tim Ryan had done his job on border security, this poor girl would have never been raped in the first place. That, to me, is the main public policy takeaway from this very, very tragic situation. It shouldn't be allowed to be used as a Democrat talking point.
No, I agree with that. I also think too, and I don't know, I've never heard a Democrat actually be asked this or answer to this. Ruth Bader Ginsburg years ago kind of helpfully warned Democrats, look, this decision about Roe is going to be challenged at some point. The court's determination about Roe is going to be challenged. Obviously, what we saw with Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. And it was almost as if she was giving a talk somewhere. We've played the audio. Everybody's talked about this. But she was sort of warning her own ideological side, you better be prepared for this when it happens, because abortion advocates have always focused on the federal effort. But yet, at the same time, they haven't really done anything to implement or shore up their position state by state. Now, I know that they try to misrepresent this and say that states like yours don't have any protection for the life of the mother, which is patently false. But if they wanted anything further, why didn't they? What are your thoughts on why they didn't actually do more work state by state? Because it seemed as though they actually are playing their base to try to blame Republicans, when ultimately, in a lot of these states, they ran the legislatures. Why didn't they act? Why didn't they shore up their positions?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Dana. I think the answer is from a Democratic, all Democratic policy perspective. These guys never had to persuade their fellow citizens. They never actually had to win this argument on an electoral basis. They always just had the courts step in and make this policy for them. And because of it, they've never really had to do the work of persuading people. And it's, if you look at our abortion laws in this country, we're among the most radical, even now, among the most radical countries when it comes to late term abortion, when it comes to, we don't require doctors to provide care for babies who survive botched abortions. And the reason is because these guys just assumed the federal courts were going to take care of the argument for them. And now it's back to the states. And of course, they've got the media on their side. But I think we have basic morality and ethics on our side. So we shouldn't be, again, put on the defensive of this. This is one of the real worries I have about Republicans in 2022 is I've watched some of my fellow Republicans. And look, I get it. I've never run for office before. It is an unusual and in some cases, not a comfortable thing to do when the media tries to put you on the defensive. But we just can't let him here, because I do think that we have the better of the argument. We just have to be willing to actually make it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Talking with J.D. Vance, who is the Republican nominee for Senate in Ohio. As much talk as there is on abortion, that doesn't even rank in the top 10 issues of voters' concerns. And I was looking at where Ohioans stood. This OPEC Plus, I want to shift gears and ask you about energy here, because I was looking at some of the reports. AAA reported that Ohio ranks in the top 10 states with the steepest price changes in gas prices over the last week. And apparently your state is going to be hit. I think you're going to take the brunt of the hit from the OPEC Plus decision here with the Biden administration. Talk to me about this and the crunch that your voters are feeling and as a result of all of this. The refusal for domestic drilling, and now we're relying on Venezuela.
Yeah, it's really pathetic, and it's really sad for a lot of us in Ohio, especially our middle class who can least afford to pay more at the pump. And you know this, Dan, it's not just gas, right? Everything gets more expensive. When energy gets more expensive, it affects the cost of food. It affects the cost of manufacturing. It affects the cost of pretty much everything that you buy. And like you said, this is a totally unforced era. I mean, we're sitting in Ohio on the Saudi Arabia of natural gas reserves. We have great oil reserves in Texas, even in Ohio, certainly Pennsylvania, and other states as well. If the president just allowed us to drill the stuff, to get it out of the ground, to refine it, and to transport it on these pipelines that Joe Biden and Tim Ryan have shut down, we would have really low energy costs. It would help our businesses, and most of all, it would help our families. Here's the crazy thing about this, Dana. Like, I'm not a Joe Biden guy. Obviously, I know that you're not. I know that 99% of your listeners don't like Joe Biden. It's still really pathetic to see the president of the United States go around to these tin-pot dictators and beg for oil when we have plenty of it right here at home.
Yeah, and as you just said, too, sitting on essentially the Saudi Arabia of fuel supplies there in Ohio, and there are so many states in the nation that are able to supply and able to offset either the dirty gas coming in from Russia or oil coming in from the Saudis and OPEC Plus, and then empowering now as a result of not going through. And those are jobs too. Those are jobs that the clean extraction. We're so good at that. Those are jobs being denied in Ohio.
That's exactly right. Such a good point. And the crazy environmental argument that I just cannot get over is, even if you take these people at face value that we're about to undergo an environmental catastrophe, to be clear, I don't, but even if you take their arguments at face value, the dumbest thing that you could be doing is transporting our energy and manufacturing sector to China, which is economically terrible. It's terrible for Ohio's workers, but it's also environmentally preposterous because they're the dirtiest economy in the entire world. So I'm trying to understand here, we care about the environment, and yet we're creating energy and manufacturing jobs in the dirtiest economy in the world. How does this make sense? Of course, it doesn't, but that's not really the point. I think the point here is to allow their activists to get some wins, and who cares if Ohio consumers and Ohio families suffer? It's just a terrible policy.
Right. There. We're talking with J.D. Vance, who is running as the Republican nominee for Senate in Ohio. I just saw a new survey out looking ahead at 2024. You know how these things are kind of like looking into crystal balls. It said DeSantis led Biden by led by a huge margin in Ohio. A lot of people are looking at your race, I think, as a measure of a couple of things. The continued Republican strength, especially in states like Ohio, which Democrats love to fight over and have lost a lot of ground in. I think they're also looking at it as a way to measure who's actually controlling the Republican Party. But one of the things why I think your candidacy sticks out to me, because I'm familiar with your writings at National Review back in 2014, and it struck me as amusing because some of the people that you used to write with and write for, I guess they thought I feel like they have an uncomfortable relationship with populism, and populism can be good. I wanted to get your thoughts on this because I read a piece, they were saying, well, which is the real J.D. Vance? And it always comes back to, I feel like people are just uncomfortable with, as you said, being aggressive in response to the press, refusing to take the bait from the opposition party, and then with any kind of populism at all whatsoever. And this is really prevalent within certain factions on the right. How do you bring those people in? Because I know yours is a tight race and you need everybody's support. How do you bring those folks in?
I mean, the way we're trying to win our race is pretty straightforward. It's the kitchen table issues, it's crime, it's immigration, the drug crisis, and certainly the inflation problem. That's really what we're hammering it on. And also the fact that Tim Ryan, he tries to pretend to be a populist himself, even though he criticized a lot of the policies that were working for people just a couple of years ago. But he's almost running a fake Republican race. He's trying to pretend to be a Republican because he knows the people of Ohio don't like what he's selling as a far left Democrat. So part of our job is just to define Tim Ryan by his own voting record, to make sure that people know who he actually is. But Danny, you're exactly right. I mean, I think a lot of elites, a lot of our media class is very uncomfortable with what's going on in the conservative movement these days with people like me who refuse to sort of bend a knee to them. And you're also right about the fact that I think a lot of these people maybe thought that I was more willing to be on their side. I think of it as sort of controlled opposition. You're a conservative, but you never really challenge the prevailing powers in this country. I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in the people that I care about being able to live a good life in the country their parents and grandparents built. If that's your goal, you have to be willing to fight the entrenched media, especially because they're the ones who have been cheerleading so much of what's made this country less free, less prosperous, and less safe.
And one thing, talking with JD Vance, one thing that I've noticed that that some people seem to forget is that feels like the past 8 years have been just hypersonically sped up.
Yes.
With the weaponization of different agencies now 40-year high inflation, everything that we're dealing with seems to I don't think this is just me. It just seems to have happened so quickly. Obviously, you realize the immediacy of that challenge, and you have to move and acclimate to fight it. So yeah, you're going to be aggressive in pushing back. You're going to be aggressive with messaging, and I just feel that some people they just don't get that, which is why I actually appreciate it, because I just feel that it's just a little bit more transparent.
Yeah, it's such a good point about the hypersonic pace at which things seem to be moving. I mean, it's crazy to believe it feels like 10 years ago, but it was actually a year ago where Anthony Fauci was saying that people should lose their jobs for not taking the vaccine because the vaccine prevented transmission. And now everybody admits now that the vaccine actually doesn't prevent transmission. It at best just reduces the severity of the illness. On so many of these things, it's like, I can't believe where we were, and I can't believe how much we've learned just in the last year, the last 18 months. You're exactly right about this. And I think that's why so many people, it's not just Republicans. Remember, it's a lot of, blue collar Democrats. It's a lot of heartland independents who are just looking around and saying, this is not the country that I was promised. This is not the country I thought that I had. We need to get back to basic common sense.
Last question for you. Talking with JD Vance in Ohio. This, I think, we say this about every election. This is the most important election. I really think this midterm election, though, particularly the Senate, is the most important election that I have no words. It comes down honestly to just a couple of seats, one of which is yours. That's an incredible burden to have on your shoulders as well. But you were just talking about the number of people that have been turned off from these far left policies. It includes a number of these blue collar Democrats in Ohio. What is your message to voters out there who are watching your race so intently? And we have a number of affiliates in Ohio, people who are listening right now, and maybe they still haven't figured out who they're going to cast their lot for.
It's really simple, Dana. It's that I think our people deserve better. They deserve to go to the grocery store and not have their bank account destroyed by the prices of food. They deserve a country with a real border. They deserve to be able to walk down the streets without having themselves or their loved ones assaulted. All of these things have gotten worse because our leadership has failed the people of Ohio. Tim Ryan is part of that leadership. He's been part of it for 20 years. We just need to take the state in a different direction. That's really my argument. And I think it's going to win the day. And I think by November the 8th, Dana, we're going to win the day convincingly. We'll have to see, but I feel very good about where we are.
Oh, we're going to be watching this race.
And if people want to help us, Dana, jdvance.com is the place to do it. We're taking volunteers. We're taking support. jdvance.com if people want to help us out.
All coming down to a handful of seats, of which yours is one. JD Vance out of Ohio, nominee for Senate for the Republican Party. Good to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us,
Dana.
and we'll be
See
watching.
you.
Good luck.